Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the online masterclass, Climate Geopolitics and Australia's Hydrogen Journey. My name is Aline Tang, Assistant Content Analyst at Leader Associates, and I'm more than glad to host this masterclass. The class is part of the digital content of our upcoming event, Connecting Green Hydrogen APAC 2023, which will take place on July the 25th and 26th in Melbourne, Australia, serving as a premium platform to connect with leading hydrogen project owners and industry professionals and to share knowledge about the latest advancement of green hydrogen. At this masterclass, we are honored to have Mr. Mendo Kundevski, Director of Energy Transition at S&P Global, as our keynote speaker. Welcome, Mr. Mendo. The stage is yours now.
Thank you, Eileen. It's a pleasure to be here to take part in this webinar masterclass, and I'm looking forward to the in-person event at the end of July. Today, I'd like to talk about Australia's hydrogen journey. But as we know, the world is going through a lot of issues. There's the need to address energy security, inflation, artificial intelligence, and of course, the ongoing challenge of deeper decarbonisation. And on top of that, the geopolitical tension between the great powers, but especially the competition between the United States and China, will shape our future for years to come. And it's through that lens I want to talk about Australia's hydrogen journey. Before we do that, just a little bit about S&P Global and specifically Commodity Insights. We are one of 5 S&P Global divisions. All divisions are committed to providing market intelligence, essential market intelligence for our global clients. And when it comes to S&P Global Commodity Insights, as the name suggests, for us, it's about servicing the global energy and commodity markets. We provide rich price assessments, data, and rigorous insights to allow our customers to make the best decisions. But we're uniquely placed because we have this complete and integrated view of global energy and commodity markets. And that gives us a unique vantage point of the energy transition, and essentially for us to convey the ongoing competition and complementarity between fossil fuels and renewable energy. Within Commodity Insights, we have 4 business lines. The bulk of our climate solutions are within our gas, power, and climate solutions divisions. But the other 4 divisions also have a range of energy transition and climate solutions. I want to go back a little bit to set the scene to talk about the need for prices and price assessments as critical elements to functioning spot markets before we dive into the heart of this discussion. Now, unlike equities and future contracts, physical commodities are not homogeneous. So our benchmarks are used as reference points in commodity trading, and we also establish standards that give market participants a common understanding of the unique characteristics of commodities so they can make comparisons. This means by standardizing and providing an assessed value for a commodity or energy, our price assessments become the critical reference points for buyers and sellers. Essentially, they can rely on our independent daily spot prices as a gauge of fair and competitive pricing. Therefore, they don't have to be engaged in endless negotiations on price, which can stall projects and investments. Our spot prices are used in 3 ways. Obviously, it's for pricing term contracts, future settlements, and also derivatives are often priced against our spot prices. And here are some of the prices that we have throughout the globe for different commodities. We have over 100 years experience. Closer to home, for example, we have JKM, which is a price of liquefied natural gas delivered into Asian markets. And it's considered the global reference price for LNG. In context of the energy transition, the emerging commodities and energy solutions, just like the traditional ones, are also non-homogeneous. And what a good case in point being hydrogen. As we know, hydrogen can be produced using different feedstocks and different technologies. But the two that are getting a lot of attention are the ones that have lower greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, the star is green hydrogen followed by blue. So the lower emissions intensity correlates a higher value and potential prices that would be paid for these products. Around the globe, in support of a future trade of hydrogen, we're providing some of the building blocks through our many assessments. The ones in green, for example, are daily production cost assessments of hydrogen, looking at the major producers of hydrogen, different countries and different jurisdictions within countries. And every day we assess the different technologies that could be deployed using local feedstock and input costs to give a comparison of the production cost of hydrogen per kilogram. There are ammonia prices for traditional ammonia, coupled with assessments for green and blue, carbon neutral assessments, and also pump prices. All of these are helping to understand the pieces of the puzzle of a future market for hydrogen. Now let's move on to the heart of our discussion, and let's begin by getting an assessment of the latest on climate change. As we know, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their best assessment, their best estimate, they believe the world is on track to a 3-degree warming by the end of the century. That's depicted by the yellow line. There are other scenarios which are also plausible, high emission scenarios or low emission scenarios, but the critical message is the world is losing the opportunity to stay under 1.5 or a 2-degree scenario. According to our view, we believe the world is actually more inclined to reach a 3-degree warming situation by 2050, not the end of the century as suggested by the IPCC. This is suggested in that straight red line, our reference case. Now, significantly, in order for the world to stay under a 2-degree scenario, which is that dashed red line, more work needs to take place in decarbonisation, and essentially global emissions have to stay at or under about 15 gigatons of carbon. Last year was the 5th warmest year on record, according to many of the leading agencies that are tracking global average temperature. But most significantly, that was the warming of the past few years during the cooler phase, the La Nina. This year, we're moving to an El Nino, which is the warmer phase. And according to NASA, already this March has been the 2nd hottest March globally since records have been kept. Now, what does this mean for the need to address climate change? It means most countries, but especially the G20, have to step up in terms of their commitments. And this was the call that was made by the G7 most recently. And it's a common theme that we hear, the common message, which is by 2025, emissions should peak, on track to be halved by about 2030 if we stand a good chance of reaching net zero emissions by the middle of the century. And the bulk of this responsibility is not only with the G20, but look at the contribution from China and the United States. 46% of global emissions. China is the largest emitter now and will be in the future, but historically, that responsibility in terms of emission contribution was with the United States. And examining the United States and China a bit closer on the competition and also some cooperation on climate change, it's a mixed message, but it's fair to say there's probably been more competition than cooperation. Most notably, in 1997, the United States refused to ratify the Kyoto Protocol significantly because developing countries, mainly China, were excluded from undertaking some heavy lifting. However, in 2015, at the Paris Conference of the Parties, both countries declared their national contributions early, which provided the impetus for other countries to follow. So we're living through that Paris era now where nations determine their own contributions and they have to step up. Interestingly, by 2030, the US has a 40% emissions reduction target, which it legislated. China at the moment is seeking to get peak emissions before 2030, but its main goal is to have low emissions per unit of GDP by about 65% by 2030. So not an absolute reduction, and by 2060 to achieve carbon neutrality or even before. Australia has very similar climate commitments as the United States, 2050 a net zero emissions aspiration, and by 2030, through last year's Climate Change Act, the legislated commitment of achieving a minimum of 43% cut in emissions by 2030. Okay, now putting this into context again about the global challenge of decarbonisation and where hydrogen fits in, what I have here on the left-hand side is our most likely view of emissions by end-use energy sectors. That's the 3-degree world that we see is the most likely outcome by 2050 with the way things are trending. On the right-hand side, we have the 2-degree scenario. So you can see the size of the challenge in terms of decarbonisation when you look at some of the harder to abate sectors such as transportation in yellow and also industry in red. They're the ones that have been hard to abate, but the challenge is also to do more in the power sector. And obviously, when you look at the power sector coupled with transport and industry, this is where the hope sits for hydrogen. Supporting the hard to abate sectors, but also supporting the power sector, displacing gas, using hydrogen instead of gas for power generation, but then also hydrogen, as it can be stored, can also support intermittent renewable energies. However, the solution is there in terms of hydrogen, but according to our best estimates, by 2030, the bulk of hydrogen production will still be grey hydrogen. It's not until 2040 where clean or greener hydrogen specifically will start to comprise the bulk of the supply. And 2050, which is a long time away, that's really where you have a lot more green hydrogen. Now, these are estimates that get revised. There's a lot of activity, a lot more commitments coming through. But the main message is time is of the essence, and a lot of this supply of cleaner hydrogen has to come sooner. And on the right-hand side, we have a breakdown of the major producers of hydrogen. And look at that. We expect China and the United States to be the major producers. But there's a good story for Australia. In purple, there's a sizable 12% at this rate by 2050 for Australia. Not too bad. And obviously, Australia has an aspiration to be a major exporter of hydrogen. So let's look at that. 2019 was a significant year with the launch of the National Hydrogen Strategy. And before that strategy, many of the Australian states had their own strategies in place. So this national strategy had the support from the states, the national government, but it also had multi-party support from different political parties. The aim is for Australia to be a top 3 exporter, especially to Asian markets. And in 2021, to help achieve that aim of being a major exporter, The former government had that notional stretch goal of producing hydrogen at roughly, give or take, $2 per kilogram, somewhere close to the end of this decade. But since then, according to the assessments undertaken on our hydrogen journey, we've been slipping. Most notably, if you compare last year's assessment with the 2021 assessment, Australia is slipping on a lot of fronts: investment, cost competitiveness, and that should be a bit of a wake-up call. In particular, securing final investment decision has been quite elusive for many projects, and that has to be rectified. And this is why this year, the Australian government, in an attempt to kickstart the industry, has contributed $2 billion in a recent budget as a bit of a down payment, according to the government, with more to follow, supporting about 2 to 3 green hydrogen projects. And obviously, this is all about making some efforts to counter the significant efforts in the United States through the Inflation Reduction Act. And let's take a look at what the United States has, not only in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, which we'll get to, but let's go back to 2021, and maybe most countries, including Australia, should have been paying a little bit more attention, because this is where, in 2021, the United States made a bold aim of producing hydrogen at $1 per kilogram within 1 decade. And this is the same time that Australia had the $2 goal for hydrogen production. And last year, 2 significant outcomes. Firstly, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Sorry, that was in 2021. $9.5 billion for clean hydrogen infrastructure and research, of which $8 billion is for hubs. And then, of course, last year, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's not a conversation on climate change that does not refer to the Inflation Reduction Act, because significantly, it is a game changer for investment in climate change, and not just for hydrogen, but for all clean technologies. And the current estimate, the $370 billion, which is from the United States' own Congressional Budget Office, is actually on the lower side of the total investment that could be delivered, according to external analysis, that the investment could be closer to $1 trillion given the 10-year lifespan for some of these investments and the incentives. And this is why Australia and other countries have to step up in terms of their hydrogen plans and investments. So let's look at those incentives in Inflation Reduction Act. There's a combination of production credits for different technologies, so the production tax credit for hydrogen, or the clean electricity production tax credit, or an investment tax credit. And there are some end-use credits for clean energy, electricity, clean fuel production. And when it comes to hydrogen, you've got the production tax credit, but you also have a revamped sequestration credit known as 45Q. Significantly, the IRA favors green hydrogen production over blue. While it's theoretically technology neutral, it's the potential to stack hydrogen production credits with renewable production credits or investment tax credits, which give blue a bit of an advantage over, give green, an advantage over blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen, on the other hand, must choose if it's to apply the hydrogen production credit, tax credit, or the 45Q sequestration credit. The two cannot be stacked together, unlike what can be done in terms of stacking green hydrogen credits. And looking at a bit closer of how this will play out in many of the states, we have some analysis here for the levelized cost of hydrogen in Texas, comparing the first 4 on the left-hand side, being SMR, blue hydrogen, applying the sequestration credit, the one that's probably more attractive for blue hydrogen, versus on the right-hand side, the two for green hydrogen using onshore wind. And the headline is quite striking. The cost for hydrogen production applying the production credit for hydrogen and then the electricity credit can get hydrogen production down to well under $1 per kilogram. Now, not only does the Inflation Reduction Act provide that suite of incentives, and it's drawing capital from all around the world, other countries, companies are going to the US, but it's also the certainty and of this time frame. You've got the production credits that will sunset in 2033, and the last payment can be made in 2043. And in parallel, there's a development over the next decade of the hydrogen hubs, which will be completed by about 2033. So where does this all fit in? The Inflation Reduction Act and hydrogen are all part of a greater strategic suite for the US to maintain its global supremacy. Another act that's worth reflecting on last year was the CHIPS and Science Act. The CHIPS Act stands for Creating Helpful Incentives for Producing Semiconductors, as a way for the US to be less dependent on international supply chains. Obviously, Taiwan has the market, the global market for producing semiconductors. And the two other strategies that sit side by side, it's the defense strategy and a national security strategy that are worth reflecting on. Because the United States' national security strategy has some very clear intentions. And that simply is its intention to outcompete China on all fronts. That is technological front, economic, political, military. So the race is clearly on. But then you look at the linkages, the symbiotic relationship between climate and energy security is where the Inflation Reduction Act comes in to support the race on climate change and clean energy technologies. Not only that, a couple of weeks ago, here's another bipartisan plan, which probably is not getting a lot of attention because when you listen to the United States media, there's a lot of discussion about the divisions between the two parties, but they're in lockstep when it comes to this new act, the Prove It Act, which essentially is putting in the foundation for America's carbon border tax. And that is to impose fees on iron, steel, and other imports from other countries to level the playing field in terms of emissions intensity and carbon emissions from other countries, so that the products produced in the US can have a competitive advantage. And most notably, again, here, not only other countries, but China is squarely the country that the US has in mind. Let's get back to Australia and its relationship with the United States in context of all of these competing issues: climate, energy security, minerals. A couple of weeks ago, the Australian government launched the Critical Mineral Strategy. And before that, a few weeks before that, at the G7 summit in Hiroshima, there was the announcement of the Climate, Critical Minerals and Clean Energy Transformation Compact between the United States and Australia. And this is what's known as the third pillar of Australia's alliance with the United States. The first pillar being security, the second being the economic pillar. But it's significant because what this aims to do through the President and the Congress is to treat Australian supplies and activity as if they were domestic activity in the United States. And this privilege is only afforded to Canada at the moment. And the significance of it is quite from our Prime Minister. Quotes, our Prime Minister Albanese said, industries like hydrogen, without industries to be based in the United States. So essentially, this is a way of the United States giving Australia a bit of a hand. We're not disadvantaged. This has for hydrogen and clean technologies. Who can forget AUKUS? But look at the elements of AUKUS, which is the nuclear-powered submarines. Australia is going to receive 3 to 5 existing US submarines, some in the 2030s, but the new AUKUS submarines will be based on UK design, but advanced US technology. Again, the United States leading the race. They'll be built in Australia, so Australian politicians are happy with jobs and growth, but we're not going to lead the world in technology. That's the realm of the United States. And rounding all of this up, Australia maybe is in a fortunate position. On the one hand, its most important relationship is the one with the United States. It has a security alliance, similar values, climate aspirations, and the United States is the 3rd largest trading partner. But then on the other hand, its 1st largest trading partner is China. 30% of Australia's trade is with China for critical resources and minerals like iron ore, coal, LNG, and look at the codependence when it comes to iron ore. 70% of global imports of iron ore are from China, and Australia exports about 50% of this high-grade iron ore. This is a big reason why Australia managed to sustain the longest economic growth, avoiding a recession in history. That was 27 years, interrupted by COVID. No other country managed to do that. Other countries went into recession during the global financial recession, but Australia managed to avoid it, most notably due to the big appetite for our resources from countries like China. Yes, Australia has had some tensions with China recently. Many topics here, such as the AUKUS, the Pacific Islands, Taiwan, but the codependence in terms of trade is quite significant. I want to end up here by reflecting on that notion, the lucky country. When it comes to Australian vernacular, there's a bit of a twist. Sometimes we express things in a bit of an ironic manner. For example, one of our pop singers, Kylie Minogue, she had a song called I Should Be So Lucky. But she was actually lamenting how unlucky she is in love. And another prominent Australian is Donald Horne, who wrote the book, The Lucky Country, back in the late 1960s. But this was not a positive term. It was seen as a bit of a wake-up call to Australia, that we could do more. So he stated, Australia is a lucky country run mainly by second-rate people who share its luck. Although its ordinary people are adaptable, most of its leaders in all fields so lack the curiosity about events that surround them that they are often taken by surprise. This was a wake-up call to not just sit back and rest on your luck, but actually maybe, given the current geopolitical environment, a connection with the United States, having massive trading partners in Asia, China, Japan, South Korea, who want Australia's hydrogen, just like in the past, when it comes to hydrogen, maybe we'll get lucky again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mendo, for presenting us with such an instructive and illuminating speech, and give us such a detailed illustration of climate geopolitics and Australia's hydrogen journey. And here I've got some interesting questions based on your speech, and hope that you could further explain and illustrate for me and for our audience. So you mentioned that Commodity Insights view is 3-degree warming by 2050. Does this mean you don't think staying under a 2-degree warming by 2050 is possible?
It's a very good point that comes up often. That is our current view based on the energy mix and the emissions associated. So we're saying essentially that is most likely the case of 2050. It's not ruling out that the world can get to under 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, even more difficult. But the challenge is quite significant. On the plus side, there are many changes that we expect to see over the next couple of years that could contribute to getting a more positive outcome by 2050. Now, I should just say that that is our first case, our reference case, which is the most likely view. On top of that, I mentioned the 2-degree scenario, and then we have many other scenarios that depict a 1.5-degree world under different conditions, such as more investment in clean technology and greater alignment globally, especially from, as I mentioned, the major emitters, have in terms of contributing greater decarbonisation, especially from 2025 to 2030. But we're yet to see that, and the next 5 years especially will be significant. And once we see more changes, then we'll update our projections. And they're not static, they're quite dynamic. So when there are updates in technology, policy, investments, and we see that emissions can come down, and there's a change in the composition of old energy fossil fuels and new, they get included in our projections. But at the moment, yes, that is still our main view. And 2 degrees to 2050 and 2 degrees, staying under 2 degrees is quite difficult.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And the second question is, how long can we expect a spot market for hydrogen to emerge? And is the current geopolitical landscape helping or hurting this?
It's a question that comes up often. And the headline is that I anticipate, now we can't predict the future, but my personal feeling is that I think a spot market for hydrogen will be with us within 5 to 7 years. Now, let me qualify that. Let's go back over the past 5 years on the global hydrogen journey. In 2017, we had Japan launch its basic hydrogen strategy. Now, that was the game changer, and it let other countries know, including Australia, Japan is serious. Other countries followed. 2022, we discussed the significance of the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. So within 4 years, or just under 5 years, 2 significant game changers for hydrogen. If we look ahead, next 5 years, 5 years is a long time, and there are many developments every week and every moment, really, all around the world. Joint ventures, more investment, collaboration. So given that, given the urgency, it probably is closer than we anticipate. The other consideration is that many people look at previous spot markets like LNG and say, well, LNG took decades to establish. Yes, that's true. The LNG spot market took a lot longer and getting all the pieces together. But the urgency to address climate change and investment on hydrogen is increasing. And then, as you touched on, the other part of the question, what about the geopolitical environment? Is it hurting or hindering this progress? Overall, on balance, I think it's been a positive for accelerating hydrogen market development. Because as I touched on, the link between climate change, addressing climate change, and energy security is very strong. And that will be the case in the future. So on the one hand, addressing the need to deal with energy security means relying on fossil fuels on the short term, but at the same time, there's been an acceleration on alternatives to fossil fuels as a way to deal with energy security, but also for decarbonisation. So on that, I think that's, on balance, it's been positive. The geopolitical landscape, although very turbulent, uncertain, it's been more positive for hydrogen market development.
Yeah, uncertain but positive. Okay, thank you, very insightful. And I'm also wondering, can Australia be a top 3 exporter of hydrogen globally?
Well, this is the question that we all discuss all the time in Australia, but others, there is serious competition. And I touched on the United States and China as being major producers, but obviously there are other countries in the mix. Saudi Arabia is very keen, other Middle Eastern countries. Simply, Australia has to be a top 3 producer of hydrogen. Now, the former aspiration from the National Hydrogen Strategy was to supply Asian markets. That's a no-brainer. We can do that. I mean, Australia will be the major exporter of hydrogen to Asian markets, one of the top 2, no doubt. But we can step up. Again, as I touched on, let's just not take our luck for granted. We can do more. We can step up and have a little bit more aspiration. There's no reason why Australia cannot step up and be one of the leading, if not the leading exporter in hydrogen in Asia, but also one of the major ones globally. There should be nothing less. And to add to that, we have the solid relationships with a lot of countries, Japan, Korea, I mentioned China, I mentioned Australia. China won't necessarily import Australia's hydrogen, it will compete. But Japan and South Korea alone, Singapore, other countries, yes, exporting to Europe might be more difficult, but there's enough demand for hydrogen within Japan, South Korea, other Asian countries that Australia could easily supply to.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for your detailed and professional answers to all these questions. And I can't wait to learn more about S&P Global's unique insights at our physical event in Melbourne, Australia. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you. And finally, I'd like to thank our audience. Thank you so much for your attention. Hope you find this masterclass useful and insightful. You could download the presentation slides by submitting your information to review the whole content today, as well as the key takeaways of this masterclass. Please stay tuned to our upcoming digital series as well. See you next time.